Bacon Heights has always been a church that's been committed for the next generation, to the next generation. And they put their money where their mouth is. They put action behind the vision that's on the paper. We see that in the late 90s. Bacon Heights says we want to pour into families, and if we're going to do that, we need to pour into kids. And so a children's pastor was brought on staff in the late 90s. Now you understand, this was not when it was trendy to have a children's pastor. Now it is. You can go to churches, and if a church says we want to invest in the next generation and family ministry, you probably will see a children's pastor on staff. But this was before then. This was when student ministry was huge, and you had a student pastor. But Bacon Heights says we want a student pastor, but we also want to move in and bring on a children's pastor. And so they did that. And at first, part-time. And Dana was the one who came on board, and she went to the pastor and she said, okay, how well do you really want to invest in families? Because if you do, it needs to be more than part-time. And so they brought her on full-time. And of course, she retired in the end of 24, and we are continuing that emphasis and priority as a church to pour into the next generation, do family ministry. And we brought Leah on board, and Mike already mentioned she's doing a great job, and excited about the future, the present and the future of kids ministry. But in the summer when I felt, I believe, a nudge from God to preach a series on marriage, I thought that lines up with our vision. That lines up with what we as a church want to do. We want to build strong families, and that it starts with building strong marriages, and that maybe doesn't start, but it includes family ministry with kids that have, or parents who have kids and teenagers. I mean, I don't know if we can take a poll. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you're married and you had kids or teenagers at the house, you know how hard marriage is then. I kind of crack up and laugh when I come across a couple, and they're really, they're struggling in their marriage, and they think, we're going to add a kid to the mix, and that's going to help our marriage. It's going to make your marriage more complicated, just guarantee you that. And so I knew this series was going to build into marriages and families, and that's what we want to do. But at the same time, I knew this series was going to help marriages across the board. I mean, if you've been married 1 year or 51 years, unless you're perfect and you have the perfect marriage, then this series can be an encouragement to you, and maybe a challenge at the same time, that God would speak in and say, hey, let's work on this. And so whether you are married, newlywed, or whether you've got this thing down and you've experienced the golden anniversary or beyond, God, I believe, has a word for us. Because you know what? Write it down. Marriage is hard. And even when you kick the kids out of the house, even when the kids leave the house and you haven't killed them yet, it's still hard. Empty nest or not, marriage is still a challenge. And so I wanted to spend just a few weeks, 4 weeks, to say, hey, let's work and pour into and encourage and equip marriages across the board. And so I knew this series was going to be an encouragement and a challenge to marriages from young to old. At the same time, I realized that there are folks maybe that are single but want to get married. You know there's a statistic, Gen Z, 77% of Gen Z want to get married. That's a pretty good statistic. And so they're not married, but they want to get married. 81% of Gen Z still values marriage. So they're not married yet, but they want to be. They're going to be maybe. And maybe there's a single mom, and you're like, you know what? There might be a day in the future I can still see myself getting married again. So all singles, and this includes teenagers. I know you might be 15 and you're thinking to yourself, this preacher is preaching on marriage and I'm 15 years old. It doesn't apply. It does apply. You just don't realize it applies. But when you get married, pull out these notes and you're like, oh, he did know maybe something he was talking about. So I think it applies to those who are single but are looking forward to maybe one day, someday out in the future get married. Take notes and file them away. Maybe they'll be beneficial someday down the road. And I get it. There is a group. There's a group that maybe some widows and some widowers And the last thing in their mind is married again. They're done. They're not going down that road. And maybe there's some singles and maybe marriage isn't in the future. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, preacher, you're spending 4 weeks on marriage, and yet I'm beyond that stage. And what am I going to do for these 4 weeks? Well, let me encourage you 2 things. Come. If nothing else, the fellowship is awesome. The fellowship here at Bacon Heights, I think, is just good. Now, I'm biased, I promise you. I own up to that, but there's something good about that. And if you, a couple of weeks ago when we got snowed out and I was up here by myself with a few folks just preaching to a camera, I missed the folks, even some of you. I missed just being with you. And there's something about that. So you still can get encouraged and you can be an encouragement to others. But the other thing is this, 2 things. One is there still might be a chance you run into God on a Sunday morning. And an encounter with God is worth your coming. And you can be the biggest cheerleader and prayer warrior for couples and marriages and families these next 4 weeks. So come, be a part, and maybe while I'm preaching, you're like, preacher, there's nothing you're going to say. That's fine. Just spend 30 minutes in prayer praying for the families and the marriages. God hears our prayers. Years ago, I came across a book by Jimmy Evans. Jimmy Evans has spent his life pouring into marriages and couples to build strong marriages. He wrote a book called The Marriage on the Rock. And I bought that book and read it. And in it, actually, these 4 sermons, the framework of them are spring from that book. But in that book, he shares some misconceptions, marriage misconceptions. And I want to share 2 of them with you as we kind of get launched and started this morning. The first one is this: if we marry the right person, we'll live happily ever after without much effort at all. Anybody agree with that? The only ones who agree with that are if they're young enough and in love enough, which I've done some premarital counseling amongst some folks. I mean, they had love in their eyes. They didn't hear anything else I said because they were in love and it was going to be awesome. We found the right person. Great. But if you've been married for over a week, you know marriage is hard work. Marriage is tough. There's a reason half of marriages end in divorce. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. It requires effort and energy and sweat and patience and love and forgiveness. And it's not that I'll marry the right person and the rest is a piece of cake. That's just not true. But there's that misconception if I marry the right person, it should be easy. It should be easy. And when it's not easy, and by the way, all marriages are going to hit a rough patch where it's not easy. But if you think that if I marry the right person and it's easy and it doesn't get easy, what comes into your mind? Maybe I didn't marry the right person. And then if I didn't marry the right person, then maybe I need to say bye to this marriage so I can go find the right person. Perhaps we bail on marriage too quickly because of some of these misconceptions. If I marry the right person, it should be a piece of cake. It's not going to be a piece of cake. It's hard. The second misconception is this: if the emotional love we once felt for each other, if it's gone, then we must have married the wrong person. So if my emotion, which emotions are fickle, so if my emotion of love isn't as strong as it once was, then maybe I married the wrong person. If I married the wrong person, maybe I need to bail and go find the right person. But see, love is an action. Love is not an emotion. And so when the emotion is gone, don't bail. Now, I'm not here to say that if you are in an abusive marriage or an abusive relationship, physically or emotionally, verbally, that you don't need to separate. In fact, that's the first thing I would share with you. Get out, separate, remove. I'm not saying divorce as of yet, but separate from the abuse and then see if you can work through and maybe get back together. But I'm also one who says we don't need to bail too quickly. We need to lean in, not lean out. We need to put some sweat in it and not give up and see what might come. Jimmy Evans also has talked about successful relationships and destructive relationships. And he says it this way: in successful relationships, action leads to emotions. So we're not going to be dictated, and our actions are not going to be dictated by emotions, but we're going to act even when we don't feel like we want to. And so we're going to act in this marriage relationship. We're going to be committed to one another. I'm going to act as if I'm going to love you. Act even if my emotions are saying, they might be gone. Successful relationships, action leads emotions. The reverse is true for destructive relationships. Emotions lead to actions. And so in many marriages, what's happening is the actions in the marriage are based upon emotions that are being felt. And if we're having a good day, the actions might be good. But if we're having a bad day, then the actions are going to reflect the emotions. But I love the fact of action, movement, because I believe we see that in Scripture. So we're spending 4 weeks on one verse or 2 verses, one passage in Genesis. But if we go to this passage, what we find, the first 2 things we find is action. Here's what the writer says in Genesis 2, verse 24. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. And both the man and his wife were naked, and yet they felt no shame. So last week, we talked about the man leaving his father and mother. We talked about priority, that we need to make our spouse a priority. When you leave your family, and in the Hebrew culture, family was it. Family was the primary relationship, the priority in your life. And if you're saying, I want you to leave that, the author is saying, you have now a new priority in relationships. Outside of your relationship with God, outside of your relationship with Christ, you have a new priority. It's not your mom and dad anymore. You're not going to be rude. You still need to honor your father and mother, but your priority, your primary now is your spouse. There's action behind that. There's action in leaving. There's action in placing your spouse as a priority. But then the second phrase, which we're going to focus on this morning, is there's not just a leaving, but there's a bonding too. So the CSB says that we're bonded to our wife or our spouse. The KJV, the King James, says it this way. You leave and you cleave. You cleave to your spouse. And so if last week was building on this idea of priority, your spouse should be a priority in your not just a priority, the priority in your life. This morning I want to talk about the purpose and value of pursuit. Pursuit. So we leave, that's action. But as we leave, we're also moving toward our spouse. That's action. So you cleave. I looked up this word in the Hebrew and try to get around it. What's it mean? And here's what I found. Some definitions to this word that we find in the Hebrew, this cleave, this bond to word, to cling, to stick, to stay close, to catch, to follow closely, to join together, or to pursue. Some of those I think are so accurate of this picture of leaving and cleaving, leaving and pursuing. And so we are to be actively pursuing our spouse. Now, when you're dating, that's normal, is it not? I mean, when you're dating someone, is it just not natural for you to intentionally pursue, hopefully not stalk, but pursue? Your spouse. Stalking is another thing altogether, and we're not going down that road. But there's something about pursuing. And so when I was dating my to-be wife, there was some pursuit. I remember Hardin Simmons there for summer school, and I found out she was taking summer school. I went to the BSM office, and evidently she had written her name down. I was like, I know this person. She grew up in Floydada. I grew up in Levelland. And so I picked up the phone to talk to her, call her. She's up there and I'm going to be in trouble. Just to say I'm going to be in trouble. Not really even looking to date her. But when you're in a new city and you find someone that you know, you're like, hey, let's go get a Coke. And so that's what we did. We went to the movies. Paramount Theater, High Noon, that's a whole other story. But that led to a relationship, that led to some more phone calls, that led to, hey, let's go get a Coke. And what you have to understand, my wife is as disciplined as a person as you will ever find. And so she put schoolwork above everything, even dating, just saying, just even dating. And so for her to break away and go on a Coke date, it was a massive, colossal decision she had to make. And so she did every now and then. But we went to go, we went to eat, wrote letters. And that just sappy stuff, is it not? Sappy stuff. We didn't have phones you could text, right? We didn't have phones that you could video. What was that? And I pulled out a paper and a pen and just started writing a letter and went and put it in her mailbox and on Hardin Simmons. That's what we did. But you know what that was called? Pursuing. Talking to Eddie Ruth. Eddie Ruth, she's 90-something years old, I think. She's not. I didn't say that. She's 90 years old. She comes to the first service, and she is doing some, having to do some home repair. And so she's cleaning out a closet a couple of weeks ago. She came across a letter, handwritten letter, from Bob, her husband. And so Bob's deceased, and so she's reading this letter, and it brings back just some amazing memories. I'm just telling you, Bob, at one time or another, Bob knew what it meant to pursue. Eddie Ruth. I don't know if you're like me, confession time here, but once you get the catch, sometimes the pursuit stops. It's not as important. I got her. If I got her, why keep pursuing? I'm just telling you, stupid one, keep pursuing. There's something to it. Cleaving is not a one-time action. It's a consistent, continual action to pursue. That's all. Both of my kids, when they were in their dating relationships before they got married, both of them, they were active in the pursuit. It's fun to watch. And I'm just thinking to myself, I hope that doesn't stop once they get married. Keep the pursuit. But when you've been married 1 year to 5 years, that's a little bit easier than 45 to 50. What does that look like? I want to be practical. I want to be as extremely practical for the rest of the time this morning in how you can pursue your spouse. Whether you've been living with them for 60 years or 6. Here's the first way. Discover your spouse's love language and love him or her in that language. There's a book that came out in 1992. Gary Chapman wrote it and specifically wrote it to couples, to married couples, to husbands and to wives. And he said, you know what? There's 5 languages. There's 5 love languages. And the book sold. Evidently, the book sold a lot of copies. And so they thought, you know what? If that made money, let's come back and write another book called 5 Love Languages of Kids and Children. Maybe the parents will buy that. I think it's the same 5 love languages, but packaged a little bit different. And now I think there's 5 love languages. I think there's 5 love languages of your pet. I don't know. I'm not going to look for that one, but I haven't searched that book out. But let me tell you the 5 love languages that Chapman put in his book. Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Now, here's what Gary says in his book. He says, everybody has at least one language. Some might be bilingual here and have 2 different languages. You got 1 or you got 2. And so here's the way it works. If yours is words of affirmation, that's how you hear you're loved. That's how you receive love. So if yours is words of affirmation, your spouse needs to be abundant with words of affirmation. If yours is quality time, your spouse just needs to understand, I need to carve that quality time into my schedule. Because that's how my spouse hears she is loved, he is loved. And here's what's interesting though. A lot of times you don't speak the same language as your spouse. And it's just natural to speak your native language, is it not? And so let's say yours is acts of service and your spouse's is words of affirmation. It's easy for your spouse to speak words of affirmation to you because that's his or hers. But you're just hearing a bunch of gibberish because yours is acts of service and he has not picked up the clothes off the floor. And picking up the clothes off the floor would do more to tell your wife or husband that they love you than speaking a jillion words of affirmation. I know that because I experienced that. Mine's is words of affirmation. If I'm bilingual, I've got physical touch right up there. My wife is acts of service. She could care less if I text her or tell her I love you. You said that at the altar. I know that. Don't say it again. I don't know if she would say that. She's up there. She's taking notes. I'm in trouble. I already get to that. She's like, I don't care if you say you love me. Your clothes are still on the floor. Pick them up. What? That wasn't in the marriage contract. I read the contract. You know why? Her love is acts of service. And vice versa. She's like, I do all these acts of service for you, and I haven't told you I love you in a year and a half. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm telling you I love you every day. You're not in my language. If you're going to pursue your spouse, learn his or her language and speak his or her language. Alice Smith has been to Peru. I think she went to Peru the year after it became a country. I don't know about that, but she's been to Peru forever. And she went to Peru the first time on a mission trip. She didn't know a lick of Spanish. And she came back, and in that process, God got a hold of her heart and her love for the Peruvians. And she knew she was going back. I'm going back to Peru. And so she just made it a point. I'm not going to go back to Peru and not put some time in to learn some Spanish. And so for a whole year, she went up to the public library. Kids, they didn't have internet at that time. And so she went to the public library and got Rosetta Stone, I think, and she began to learn Spanish. And she learned some vocabulary words, and she wrote some words down, and she memorized them so that when she would go back the next year, she had some Spanish under her belt. Now, here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that Alice's subjects did not match with her verbs. I'm just telling you that. Just listen to her. Just watch her. Now, here's the deal. I can't help her in that area because I don't know Spanish. But I'm just saying, you're butchering Spanish when it comes to subject and verbs. But here's what I know. The Peruvians, they so much appreciated Alice taking the time to try to learn a little bit of their language. And they were like, you studied and you took time because you wanted to speak to us and the best you could in our language. And they were captivated. And I'm telling you, you go watch Alice work in Peru, it's crazy amazing. And she communicates with him, and I don't know how she communicates with him. I mean, she put in the work, yes. But she learned to do her best to speak their language. Before I move on, let me just say we're going to Peru in July, and you can come with us. All right, that's my promo. I'm over. You want to pursue your spouse? You learn his language or her language, and you speak that language to them. Now, it's not easy. It's going to seem like speaking a foreign language because it is a foreign language to you. But if you love your spouse enough, you pursue your spouse enough, you find out their language, and you speak their language. To help you out, we have an assessment to give you. You want to know what your language is? Some of you are like, I know my language. If you don't know it, here's an assessment. You can walk out. They're on both counters. You can take it with you. You can take it. You can force your husband to take it. And then you can spend the week loving each other and speaking their language. Simple, not easy, but simple steps of pursuit. Here's another practical step you can do. understand and meet your spouse's greatest need. Understand and meet your spouse's greatest need. And the first thing many of you are saying was, how am I going to find that out? God tells us. So here's the deal. You don't have to discover your spouse's greatest need. It's in the scriptures. We just need to find it. Oh, okay. And then meet it. So let me turn to Ephesians chapter 5. And in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul speaks to husbands and wives. Maybe the most controversial passage on marriages. But in it, we find the need for wives and the need for men. Now, let me begin. I want to begin in verse 21. And this is the first mistake that many translators make, is they separate in categories, verse 21, and then they have like husbands and wives starting in verse 22. You can't do that. And I'll tell you why you can't do that in a minute. Look at verse 21. Submitting to one another in the fear of Christ. So first of all, there's mutual submission. There's wives submitting, serving. There's wives submitting and serving to husbands. There's husbands submitting and serving to wives. There's co-equals here. Your wife is a helpmeet, equal. So you're serving one another. So submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then verse 22 says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. Now here's the deal. The word submit's not in verse 22. This is why you cannot separate verse 21 and 22. The word submit is in verse 21. Verse 22, there's not a verb. And so what people do is they go back to verse 21 and they pull the verb from verse 21 down into verse 22, which is perfectly legal and okay to do. In fact, it's what you need to do. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, wives, to your husbands. What to your husbands? Submit. So verse 22, after you submit to one another, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife. As Christ is the head of the church, he is the Savior of the body. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives are to submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hates his own flesh, but provides and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, since we are members of the body. And we've heard this before. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is the mystery, it's profound, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. Verse 33, to summarize, to sum this thing up, each one of you, husbands, is to love his wife as himself, and the wife is to respect her husband. 3 overarching things in this passage, and then we'll get to the needs of the man and the wife, husband and wife. Number 1, we have to start with this huge category of mutual submission. If we come at it from hierarchy and one's above the other, it's going to head for a train wreck quick. Husbands, if you serve your wives as Christ served the church and loved the church, wives, if you serve your husbands, you set the story up, you set the plane up for success. Mutual submission. Number 2, this would have been shocking in Paul's world, but not to wives, to husbands. See, wives were already submitting to themselves. It was a patriarchal society, and it was an oppressive society, and women were just above property. There was nothing unusual about wives submitting to their husbands. That would not have shocked them or surprised them at all. But when he said, husbands, you love your wives as Christ loved the church, what? Let me tell you how that happened, sacrificially. You go above and beyond loving your wife, because that's the way Christ loved the church. And selflessly, you love your wife just like you love yourself. Well, that changes the game. He turned it upside down, but it was shocking to husbands, not to wives. The last thing, in verse 33, we finally get to the needs. The needs for wives is love. The need for husbands is respect. Verse 33. Sum this thing up. Each one of you is to love his wife as himself. If If you love your wife, what that's going to do is meet her greatest need. Her greatest need is to be loved. And when she is loved, she's going to have security above all else. And she's going to feel safe. And when that happens for the wife is going to say, this is what I was created to experience. And husbands, your greatest need is respect. Respect. I promise you will search for it. If you can't find it, you'll go searching. If you're not finding respect at the house, you're going to go down to your hang out with the guys. You'll find it in sports. You're going to find it somewhere because you were made to find it. And Paul says, oh, by the way, God created it so that wives will have their greatest need met with their husband's love, and husbands will have their greatest need met with respect. So here it is. Let's go to the wives first. Husbands, you love your wives. You love your wives. You go above and beyond. You love sacrificially. You love selflessly. You love radically. You love extravagantly. That's how Christ loved the church. And you model yourself after the love that Christ gave to the church. And you set yourself to pursue your wife in loving her. And when you do, your wife is going to have the greatest need in her life ever met. Outside of a relationship with Christ, she was made to be loved. When she finds it and experiences it, things will start clicking. This is it. So, wives, give respect to your husbands. Your husbands crave it. They're wired up for it. And if they don't get it, they will search for it. If they don't find it in their wife or at home, they'll find it somewhere else. If you want to meet the greatest need in your spouse, husbands, what is that? You just love your wife. Wives, what does that look like? You go show respect to your husband. Several years ago, I was in Dallas, went to a conference right now, media conference, and this guy named Emerson Eggerichs spoke. And I didn't know who Emerson Eggerichs was. I knew his name was hard to pronounce. And he wrote this book, Love and Respect. And as he was talking about this marriage, he's a marriage guru, and he's talking about marriage, and he says, let me talk to you about the crazy cycle. I'd never heard of the crazy cycle before, but he started talking about wives were created to be loved and husbands were created to be respected. And we can get on this crazy cycle, which is basically the crazy train, and it's not fun to be on as husbands and wives. But I have a picture for us. So here's the crazy cycle. Without love, wives react without respect. And without respect, husbands will react without love. In other words, if the wife does not feel like she's being loved, she has a tough time showing respect. And if the husband doesn't feel like he's been respected, he's going to have a tough time giving love. And so the husband is out here thinking, well, I will love you once I start being respected. And the wife is thinking, well, I'll show you respect when you start deserving respect. And until you deserve respect, I'm not going to respect you. And until I am shown respect, I'm not going to love you. And the cycle is on. And you can drive yourself crazy as husbands and as wives. I just wish I could get off the crazy train. Now, he also has something called the energizing cycle. It's the exact opposite of the crazy cycle. The energizing cycle is this. His love will motivate her to show respect. And so when the wife is shown love, then she is just motivated naturally to show respect to the one who is showing her love. And when the husbands are shown respect, he naturally is motivated to show love. I'll love because I'm being shown respect. I'm going to show respect because I'm being shown love. I'm going to love because I'm being shown respect. I'm going to show respect because I'm being shown love. It's a great cycle to be on. Do you know which cycle is easiest to get on? The crazy cycle. So what do you do if you're on the crazy cycle? The husband says, I'm not going to love because she's not showing me respect. And she's saying, I'm not going to show respect because he's not showing me love. What do? Here it is. Somebody has to decide to get off the cycle. Husbands, love regardless if you're being shown respect or not. Because your loving her will motivate her to be respectful to you. or wives, you show respect, whether he deserves it or not, but in doing so, it's going to motivate him to show love back to you. Somebody's got to get off. Somebody has to say, okay, I'll take a step back and I'll do what everything in my body tells me not to do, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to love. I'm going to show respect. I'm going to love. I'm going to show respect. All this is under the umbrella of cleaving, pursuing your spouse. It never stops. So homework. I don't know if you realize you're going to have homework today, but homework this week. If you don't know what your love language is, figure it out. Find it. Where do I start? You pick up the assessment and you take it. And then you force your spouse to take it. That's the loving thing to do. You force your spouse to take it. So each of you take it. Figure out what your love language is. And then this week, it's only a week assignment. You do everything you can, intentionally, specifically, uniquely this week, to love your spouse in her language, his language. It might seem foreign. It might seem stupid. I can't believe she thinks this is the way that you're supposed to feel loved. But I'm going to do it. Do it. 1 week. 1 week. And not once in the whole week. No, regularly, consistently. See what that does this week. Second, you just go about meeting the greatest need in your spouse's life. Wives, you do what you need to do to show respect to your husband. And here, I know he doesn't deserve it. I know he doesn't. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. I'm in trouble with all husbands, aren't I? Sorry. Husbands, you just go love your wife like you've never loved your wife before. And you do it the way Christ loved you. Well, maybe she doesn't deserve it. Guess what? You didn't deserve to be loved by God either. But he loved you anyway. So let's go do it. So this week, love your spouse in the love language of that they speak. And you, husbands, you just love. Wives, you just show respect. And in so doing, you're actively, consistently, intentionally, uniquely pursuing your spouse. Father, we thank you for today. This marriage union that you created. You created to thrive, to really be an example, a model for the world to see. A picture of your love for us, Christ, the church. Father, I pray for husbands and wives here today. I pray that this week would be just an absolutely outstanding week as we put this homework into practice. So do your work in our hearts and our minds as husbands and wives. And may you begin to revolutionize some of our marriages. Maybe revitalize some of our, maybe some of our marriages are on life support, hanging by a thread, nearly dead. Would you begin to revitalize, bring back to life this marriage? We thank you that you love us. We have life in you. We want to follow you. Specifically here in our marriages. It's in Christ's name I pray.